Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, 10 Basic Financial Steps for Special Needs Caregivers. It is my pleasure to be together with you all again today. Some housekeeping notes to share with you. All attendees are in listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. I am Lori Sjogren, Community Program and Services Director for the National Ataxia Foundation, and I will be assisting with today's webinar along with our Communications Manager, Stephanie Lucas. Questions for our webinar speakers can be typed in the Questions tab found in your control panel. And we'll answer as many questions regarding this topic as time allows during our time together today. So as your questions arise, please send those to us. Our expert speakers on today's important topic are Jerry Hulick and Kelly Piacenti. Jerry started the Washington Group Special Care Planning Team in 2004. The team assists families with financial planning and provides a wide range of expertise to fit the diverse concerns of special needs families. We also have Kelly Piacenti, who is an Assistant Vice President with MassMutual. As a mother of a child with special needs, Kelly possesses the knowledge, insight, and empathy to act as a mentor and resource for families facing similar challenges. We are grateful to Kelly, who in her role at MassMutual has been instrumental in providing valuable education on this important topic to the ataxia community over the years. Your partnership is truly appreciated. Now I'd like to invite Kelly to start us off with today's presentation. Welcome, Kelly.
Great. Hi, Lori. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm fortunate to have Jerry Hulick here with me today, and we're going to be speaking about 10 basic financial steps for special needs caregivers. I have spoken to all of you before. Hopefully this topic will help some of you that are caregivers and that have questions regarding it. So we're going to start off today. Unfortunately, we're not in Denver. We're around the country, but maybe next year we'll be in person. But we're going to do the best we can today with the webinar. So Jerry, if you could just go forward with the first slide. The first couple of slides are basically our standard disclosures, nothing too crazy here, just something that we are required to put in as well. You can go on, Jerry. And this is our MassMutual disclosure. And now we're just going to talk about really as a caregiver, what's important to you. What I think about every day as a caregiver is what happens when I'm no longer around. Many of us believe that we're going to live forever, but clearly we know that's not true. So really, as a caregiver of a dependent with special needs, you're the one who's looking out for the person's best interests. But what happens when you're no longer around? I think it's something that keeps us all up at night, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
When we look at the various different steps as we start through the process, so much of it needs to be built around ultimately the priorities and the concerns and the considerations of the family and of the individuals with disabilities, so that we really understand that we're meeting the needs for everything and for everyone. And clearly, though, when you're looking at the situation of the disability, we have to be concerned with what the financial backdrop will look like when it deals with medical treatments and things that might have to take place as expense beyond what might be covered by health insurance or might be covered by other programs, whether education is going to be involved, continuing education, skill development, or skill work with skills as the disability progresses, employment issues, in a relationship when you're continuing to work with employer benefits and employment and accommodations and what's taking place there. A big issue always for all of us is housing, where we're going to live, the type of residence, and whether or not we're going to need assistance, and the accessibility and mobility within a given house situation or residential situation is always important. We see more and more where transportation and travel, the ability to access that transportation and travel and the proximity and all of those kinds of things come into play. And really for lifestyle, social and recreation, and what we're involved with and how we're going to interact with the public or with programs that are out there. Yes, today we're in a kind of unique situation with COVID-19. We've all been staying at home more than we typically do, but we're going to emerge from that. And all of these things need to be anticipated when we're talking about lifestyle and priorities and considerations that are going to be a part of the financial picture that needs to be reviewed. Kelly,
So,
anything
Joe,
to add there?
yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that I always think about when I plan for the future, I often speak about my son Nicholas, who does live at home with us, that can only smile. He's 19 years old. When we plan for the future, many of us as caregivers look at the fact that we receive money from the government. Some of us do, some of us do not. And we're thinking that when we're planning for the future, well, the housing is taken care of, the skill development is taken care of. But that's really right now. As you can see in Washington, and things are changing every day. So when we plan for the future, you can think about the type of housing you have, the type of medical treatment you're receiving, the type of skill development you're getting. But will that always be covered by government benefits if you're relying upon them? What I tell the families that I work with is it's great. We can certainly take that into consideration. But is there something that you absolutely could not live without if the government wasn't paying for it? So when we look at housing, we can often look at what the government is providing us with, but what if it wasn't there, or what if it was decreased? That's part of the plan for the future, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
So when we look at many of the aspects of planning and financial instruments and the qualification for benefits and recognition that in many instances for public benefits, whether it be Medicaid or SSI or what have you, there are going to be limitations on the amount of money that can be held by the individual involved. And so that's where we see the integration of the legal structure and the integration of various different beneficiary designations with transference processes like transfer on death or paid on death. Paid on death can be put on bank accounts, for instance, which then kind of automatically without probate transfers different kinds of accounts to people that are successors in the transference. Beneficiary designations, the classics one that you generally see are life insurance proceeds and or retirement proceeds that will designate a beneficiary if there's still funds that are going to be distributed after the death of the individual. Well, we also want to make sure that all of those are aligned with the legal structure so that none of these kinds of things that could happen that could disenfranchise the individual for public assistance benefits or other public benefits, as well as other Social Security benefits that might be being received. All of these have to be integrated into a program that is including the legal structure, including the financial instruments, recognizing everything that's there, capturing everything that's there. Something like an inheritance could come into a situation and might mess up everything from the standpoint that that's going to go directly to an individual. So we also want to, communicate to everybody involved. So we're making sure that if something does happen, there are plans as to how that's to be brought into the situation, transferred, and we cannot then disenfranchise some of the other things. Insurance benefits, again, both individually and on an employer basis. Many times things like an employer HSA may be forgotten as to the fact that that needs a beneficiary for something that's maybe left in the account. So all these things, all the financial instruments need to be integrated completely and transference discussed and people understanding who are going to be involved with that so that something doesn't happen to disenfranchise the individual and their needs. Anything to add, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, I always have something to add. So we'll see that pattern today. But before I go on to step 3, I mean, this is really about preserving government benefits, which is the goal for many of our families. It allows you to have the best of both worlds. You can receive government benefits, but you can also put money away or have money for the person you're caring for as long as it's done properly. We can't leave money outright to them, but there are ways in which we could do it, which really gets us on to step 3, which I'm going to talk about right now, which is a family meeting. One of the things that we talk about with a family meeting is communication is very important, whether we're speaking about where you want the person to live or the person is telling you, I want to live in this location. It's about communication, communicating that there are insurance policies, there are assets, there are things that we have for this person that upon our death will go to them. It's about communication. When you have a family meeting, it's about bringing everyone together that's going to talk about the future needs of this individual, including the individual, if they're able to do that. When you discuss concerns and future care options, really take into consideration what they have now and what they're happy with. Ideally, it's bringing in all your family members and saying, this is what we foresee in the future for my son Nicholas. But it's also checking in with our other children to say, do you really want to play a role in his care in the future? When I say that, I don't mean it in a mean or negative way. What I mean is that maybe they just want to overlook the financial, but they don't want him to live with them because it's a lot to take care of him. So communication is extremely important. We need you to have a meeting with the family members or the people that could possibly be stepping in when you are no longer there. What we hear way too much, and I get a call probably once a week, is from a sibling or an elderly caregiver that says, I don't want to do this. I can't help out here. My mother never had this conversation with me. My sister never told me I would be responsible to take care of these type of things. So it's really putting it on the table, having the communication plan and saying, let's talk about what type of needs my son needs in the future and who can really pitch in and do this. I don't expect my other children to take on the care that we provide for my son Nicholas, but who will? And what role will they play in their life? So the family meeting to me is one of the most important steps because we talk to families every day that never had a conversation and that someone passes away and they suddenly don't know where documents are and they don't really know who's going to step in and where the person's going to live or who's going to take care of them. So discussing it now is probably the best bet.
Yeah, you make a good point too. Even families, as things go on, are dividing and conquering. Maybe some people are dealing with some more of the medical issues, where someone else in the family has been dealing primarily with the applications for different benefit structures. And they're not necessarily always communicating with where the current things stand. And you made a very, very important point, as simple as it may sound, just knowing where everything is as a reference, where the legal documents are and those kinds of things. If there was some kind of an event that takes place, people are focused on that and having to try to find certain things or medical directives or all the things that come into play and just not knowing exactly where they are. So that's why the communication, documentation, all of that's so critically important, because it's just going to be, it's never going to be an opportune time to deal with all those kinds of issues. So when we look at,
Exactly.
looking at a team and creating those that are dealing with all of this and what Kelly was talking about as far as everybody that's involved, it's really the same thing we've been hearing, person-centered planning around the considerations and concerns for the individual involved, those with the disabilities, but it includes the financial professional. And here we encourage that you're working with somebody that has a specialty in the area of disabilities and really understands the government benefits and the legal structures that go with that. It's a specialty area. Special needs attorneys, the same thing. There are a lot of great attorneys out there, great estate planning attorneys or elder law attorneys, but this is a specialized area when you start talking about disabilities, government benefits, the legal structure around those. The accountants, the health professionals that are familiar with the situation, what the needs may be, any sort of individual that's involved in the guidance, or social workers, recreational aspects, religious, spiritual. I mean, all of these are people that can provide excellent feedback and information that's going to help in the ultimate quality of life of the individual. And creating that team and recognizing that it's a specialty area is a critical component for success, because that's when ultimately you're accomplishing what your concerns and your priorities are as far as building this overall plan. Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the people on the team actually have been involved in the care of these individuals from day one, or the education, and they really know what the family wants and the family, foresees in the future. The problem is that we do have a lot of families that will work with an attorney that they've worked with their whole lives. My suggestion has always been, and I come from a family of attorneys, that basically if you're getting a divorce, you don't go to a real estate attorney. It's the same deal with special needs. You want to be very particular in who you go to, how they draft a trust for you. We at MassMutual don't have any special needs attorneys because we also tell our families that you need to work with attorneys that specialize in this area, and just make sure that any health professional that's been great or has provided lots of guidance, someone in your family or someone on that team knows who that person is or have that person as part of the team. So I agree with Jerry. Creating a team and taking some of these steps for family members is huge, because if anything ever happens, and I'm on the East Coast, I mean, I'm in New Jersey, so everybody knows what's going on with COVID here and in New York. I mean, we've seen a lot of families in panic mode because they didn't have a communication plan. They didn't create a team. They didn't have any resources. And now we have, someone that's never really been involved in the person's care scrambling to try to put it together. It's way too difficult. We know as care providers how much we do. It's really getting to the point that you can write it down, create a team, create a communication plan. When we get to step 5 now, it's really getting additional resources and support. Jar, can you just advance the slide?
There you go.
So, I mean, also tap into your local nonprofits, tap into any type of newsletters, publications, support groups, government agencies. These are also resources that are going to help our families. Not everybody applies for government benefits. Not everybody realizes that they could technically be eligible for those benefits. But if they haven't, you at least should know where the local Social Security office is, what type of support groups are around. Support groups just aren't for the person with the disability. They could be for family members. They could be for siblings. They could be for elderly caregivers. Whatever the topic is, there are usually local support groups within your community that can help you as well. And most of these don't come with a fee. So it's something that you need to take into consideration. How about newsletters or publications? There are many things that we get on a regular basis. EP Magazine, Exceptional Parenting Magazine. I've been reading it since my son was born. It has a lot of topics that are relevant to my family and to me. Those are the type of publications you may want to take into consideration. Local profits. Ataxia is providing you with this webinar today. They provide you with resources and information, not only regarding the disability, but for caregivers and people caring for somebody with a disability. So it's really knowing what you have locally and getting that additional resource or support that you may need. And most of these don't come with a cost. So our families don't even realize that they're there, that they're sibling support groups, that their other children could go to every day, or an caregivers support group. Those are one of the core groups that are coming up now around the country, because certainly as caregivers, we're aging. Our children are now becoming adults and outliving us. Years ago, people with disabilities, that wasn't always the case, but it is now. So we need a plan in place. And step 5 really encourages you to get local and additional resources and support. Jar, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, well, I think when it comes to the government agencies, we can't forget a lot of the programs are federal in nature, and so we might be applying through, Medicaid, for instance, is administered by the Social Security system, and as is SSI. But there are always government programs at a federal level that interact, and there might be some rent subsidies. There might be some different things when it comes to housing subsidies that an individual might get from a government agency. But let's not forget, too, that there's a lot of programs at a state level, and many of the reimbursement programs for certain kinds of health insurance or subsidies to health insurance are going to be at a state level, and then go beyond that to the local county. And many times there are adult support programs. There are programs around particular disabilities as you're trying to look at certain things. And so many times these supports may exist. And from a reimbursement standpoint, sometimes we'll see even equipment reimbursements. So I don't discount the government agencies, and don't discount the nonprofits for various different grant programs that they might have. And it's not static. It's something that's ever changing, many times because of the budgets or things that may be taken away in one area will be added somewhere else. And so every so often, looking at all the supports that might exist from these agencies, from the support of the nonprofits, what's there is something that needs to be reviewed also, just to make sure that you're not missing out on something that might exist. So the next real area we talk about this, the government benefits and entitlement benefits What this chart does really is break down the major components of the various different sides. The entitlement benefits are what we are paying for and have paid for as employees, and where the employer and employee, or if it's a sole proprietor situation, you were paying all of it into Social Security, which basically has, and we focus generally on retirement benefits. We can retire as early as age 62 and get benefits. Full retirement these days is running 66 in some months, going to go up around 67 in some months. But then there's a whole section on disability related benefits and qualification for those, and family benefits. Family benefits that will come to a spouse, family benefits that will come to children under the age of 18, family benefits that would come to a child with a disability of somebody out on a disability or in retirement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Medicare, the Social Security disability, and the survivor benefits, all those are things, and some of them are missed because we don't fully understand, and Social Security is not sending out notifications saying, oh, did you remember this program or this program? We need to be somewhat aware of the entitlement benefits that we've been paying for. They no longer send out Social Security statements, but every 5 years on the major anniversaries, like, say age 30, 35, 40, 45, and until you reach age 60, at which point you start getting them with more regularity. So you're only getting them every 5 years, but if there's still an employment situation involved, then we also need to be checking our Social Security statements, because if there's an error, if they picked up our income incorrectly, then we can only make those changes, those corrections, within a 3-year period of time, which means these days we really need to set up our own account. Go to ssa.gov, where you set up your own online account so that you can view and review your Social Security statements on a constant basis and go in. When you go in to set it up, they ask you a lot of security questions. You'll be amazed at what Social Security already knows about us. But this is where you would set up your own account, and it provides a reference to make sure that you're particularly picking up some of the family benefits that may be involved, in addition to the basic benefits we would all get as wage earners. Now, on the other side of the coin is the public assistance benefits. And these are ones that, are disability related or income related, indigent related. If you're not able to work and earn a substantial gainful employment, then some of these other benefits are going to come into play. They're going to be family oriented from the standpoint that you might have a child under the age of 18 where the incomes of the parents were deemed in the process, but now after age 18, they become their own person for purposes of public assistance benefits. So all of this comes into play. It's very difficult for somebody that doesn't have experience in this area, which is a reason for working with somebody in the financial area that really understands this, so that you don't miss benefits. Supplemental SSI security, that's money that's going to come in. You've got instruments today where you can then put the money or park the money if it's not fully used and accumulate it. So all of these programs need to be looked at and applied for. Medicaid may come into play. Other public supports that you see there, as I mentioned earlier, could be state-related benefits or county-related benefits. We also have people that will say, well, I don't really need those benefits, but if somebody's qualifying, it's just additional income that ultimately can be accumulated in various different devices, while at the same time create a more positive outcome for the lifestyle of those individuals. So all of these are things that are very important when you look at the overall planning and integrating into it. So Kelly, anything to add?
I mean, the one thing that I would add here is that, we get calls from people that say, well, Kelly, I applied for government benefits and I didn't get any. They based it on our income and we didn't get any. Well, as in my son Nicholas has recently turned 19. When he turned 18, it was under him. They looked at him. They no longer looked at my house, where he lived, my income, had nothing to do with it. Upon the age of 18, he becomes his own person. So he became eligible for every government benefit that was out there because he's never worked, he will never be able to work, and he needs all the assistance that he can get. So if you have been denied or you have been told you're not eligible for government benefits, the person you're caring for, if it is a child, that's become 18 or becoming 18, it then becomes based on what they have under their name. And if you've planned properly, they really shouldn't have anything in their name over $2,000. And if that's the case, they would be eligible for many of these programs. So it's something that our families need to be aware of. Or if you've gone to Social Security or you've gone to apply for benefits and you were told no in the past, try it again. What I've always told people is that, be honest, always tell the truth, but sometimes you'll get an answer today. If I call 3 days later, I get a different answer from them. So just make sure that you know what you're entitled to, and that when you're speaking with them, you talk about some of these programs, because they are certainly not offering them to our families. Our families really need to be educated on what's available, so that when you do have the conversation with the government, that you know exactly what you're entitled to.
Well, and Kelly, when your son turned age 18, Social Security sent you all kinds of notices telling you what to apply for, right?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm still waiting for him. He's 19. He's going to be 20. No, that's not happening. And that's what I try to tell people. It doesn't happen that way. When you go there and you get, no, you're not eligible, my son can only smile. The first time I went, I was told he's probably not eligible. My son cannot do anything independently as total care. Now, that just sounds ridiculous, but that was the type of response that I received. So we just want people to be aware of knowing what your benefits are and making sure that you advocate for them.
And I think, as you've said too, many times there'll be an initial denial for any number of reasons. Maybe it hasn't been documented. And so when you go in, and you got to recognize that you're after assistance. And so you're not presenting the best case scenario, you're presenting the worst case scenario, so that, we really have to understand the capacity and capability of the individual that's applying for the benefits. And another piece is that many times you'll hear, if you're denied, then you can always appeal. Well, there's 3 different levels. One becomes a reconsideration. So if the first notice comes back where they're saying no, or they need more or whatever it might be, then you should be asking for reconsideration, because that's something that's done actively, very currently, and very more quickly. I don't want to say quickly, because that doesn't probably exist with Social Security. But the other is the appeal. The appeal can take as long as a year to 2 years. So you generally want to first approach it with a reconsideration, having them look at it again and providing whatever necessary additional documentation to help prove the situation. And I think these terms are difficult. And we talked about resources. The Social Security Administration has what I consider to be one of the better websites that's out there. Great sections on the disability related benefits. So to better understand all that you might be eligible for, or different programs, that's a good place to start, in just going to ssa.gov, setting up your own account for your Social Security statement view, and then looking at all the benefit structures that might come into play and your eligibility of when they might come into play as you're looking at all of this. So Kelly, you want to lead with the legal structure?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the legal structure is something that you always need to take into consideration. What we'll talk about in a few minutes is prepare a letter of intent, which is not legally binding, but it is a document that many of our families use. Guardianship and different alternatives. Choose a successor, a caregiver, a trustee. Wills, everybody that we speak to, we always ask the question, how many of you have a will? Well, if you don't realize it, every one of us has a will. It may not be the one you want, but your state has one for you. So it's something that you want to take into consideration. Advanced medical directives, and also durable general powers of attorney. These are some of the things that you need to take into consideration. When we were looking at COVID, a lot of our families didn't have any of these things done and were hit pretty hard and pretty quickly. And they were scrambling to get some of these things done. Now, just on guardianship, or an alternative to guardianship, once the person with a disability becomes the age of 18, whether they're able to make their own decisions or not, they are considered a legal adult, which means, again, with my son Nicholas, not able to speak, not able to make any decisions, but I had to petition the court to get guardianship so that I could advocate for him. Guardianship is not for everyone. I'm always the first to say it. If a person's able to make their own decisions, there's no reason to have guardianship over them. But if you have concerns regarding than making decisions regarding medical or financial, then guardianship is always an option for our families. And it can be partial guardianship. You could also have alternatives to guardianship. So it's really up to the family, but you need to know what you're going to put in place. That's something that many of our families hadn't done. And with COVID, they were struggling to get it done. As in guardianship, it doesn't happen overnight. It's actually a pretty long process that you have to apply to the court, then you have to wait for a hearing, then you have to be appointed. So it doesn't happen overnight. So many families that were looking for an emergency situation were running into a little bit of a situation there. Joe, do you want to add to this slide as well?
Yeah, I think that, you've said that guardianship can be partial. And I think as we're anticipating a changing scenario, what we're trying to do too with legal documents, I mean, a durable general power of attorney where you're giving somebody the ability to do transactions and financial issues in your stead, that's not giving up your control. That's just allowing an additional person or people to have access to do the similar kinds of things. So the process of what that might be may come down to capacity or capability at the time, or maybe almost a convenience kind of thing. I mean, we see durable powers used even when two spouses will be traveling and somebody's out of the country or something like that. So it's not always about a control issue as much as it's about the ability to do certain things. I was involved in a situation with a young couple where the spouse was in a car accident and in a coma for a period of time. The car insurance had to subrogate and work with the health insurance as to the reimbursement of payments. And the husband couldn't even access information. They would not provide information. He's getting all the bills. He was getting the dunning notices, but he couldn't access any information because there were no advanced medical directives in place, nor powers of attorney or anything like that in place. At that time, they were young. They were in their 30s. And so all these things need to be anticipated regarding those with disabilities, but also regarding an entire family unit and what's going to be appropriate when events happen. And so when you see that other side, it's these are all aspects of the legal planning from an estate standpoint through trust, titling, everything that are going to be factors involved. Some apply, some do not. As Kelly said, not everybody needs guardianship. Not everybody will need special needs trusts. There could be alternatives done with different kinds of accounts. It depends a lot on the assets. So all of these are considerations, again, in working with specialty groups, and you see the two special needs attorney groups listed at the bottom of this slide, the Academy of Special Needs Planners, which is an attorney group, and the Special Needs Alliance. They're great websites. They have lots of articles about lots of topics. You can literally put in a topic, and they're typically going to give you some background information about that. And so all of this comes together in the use of maximizing what it is you're looking to accomplish, and as you try to then establish what the needs, concerns, and really lifestyle is going to be going forward.
Right. And I think it's really understanding what each one of those things, when we talk about what exactly they do, when you talk about durable power of attorney, understand what it can and can't do. I've had families think that, the type of trust they have is a special needs trust, and it's really not. So it's knowing exactly what each thing does and understanding it. And that's something you can talk to an advisor about. You can also talk to an attorney about, but it's understanding. So step number 8 is a special needs trust, which is something that we've spoken about. We don't want to run out of time here today, but we certainly want to give you an overview of what a special needs trust is. So a special needs trust is really, as I had said before, it's having the best of both worlds. It's being able to put money away, but it's also being able to have money in the person's name over $2,000. And the money is really for the benefit of the individual. There are a couple different types of trusts. There's a third-party special needs trust, which is about 99% of the trust that we see. That's a trust that's created for the individual by others. Could be by the parents, could be by the caregivers. And then we see a first-party special needs trust is a trust that is established when the person has money. Typically, we see a first-party trust when there's been an accident or there's been a medical malpractice suit and the money was owned by the individual. Once the money is owned by the individual, it has to go into something called a first party trust. What's the difference between a first party and a third party? Third party is the money has never been owned by the individual. First party, the money is owned by the individual. So the difference is that when the person passes with a third party trust, when the person passes, no matter how much they got from the government, they don't owe the government any money. With a first party trust, the difference there is that since the person did have a settlement or had money in there initially, upon the passing of that individual, the government can say, hey, we paid out $500 for that person or $1 million, we want the money back. The only money that they can get back is that if there's money in the trust, and if there's only $10 in the trust, then they can only get $10, walk away, and that's the end of it. But they do have the right to lien that trust and get money back when the individual passes. The other types of trusts are a pooled special needs trust or D4 special needs trust and the Special Needs Trust Fairness Act. These are all different types of trusts that you could potentially get depending upon your situation. Sure, do you want to talk a little bit about the trust?
Yeah, again, when you talk about first party trusts, then when you say payback, primarily what they're after if they're Medicaid benefits per se. So SSI or other government benefits that might have been received are not going to be included in the payback. It's only benefits that have been received, reimbursements that have been received through Medicaid. Pooled trusts are generally run by a nonprofit. They have some assistance in the development of how funds are used in the documents of the various different nonprofits. We generally see those when there's not as much money involved, so that you can't get some of the same institutional investment management of the funds. And so people will put their funds together in a nonprofit, they're pooled, and so they get the higher level investment management. Yet within that trust, there are compartmentalized sub-trusts that are set up for the individual. So I might have 30 individuals that are in the pooled trust of the nonprofit, but each individual has their own compartment with their own money, yet it gets to be managed at a higher level. The Special Needs Fairness Act was passed just a few years back, and that allows an individual heretofore, if you needed to set up a first party trust, it had to be set up by someone else for you as your trust with your money. Now, because of all the things that have happened, particularly with wounded warriors coming back and everything else, there's no limitation. People can literally set one up for themselves at this point, and that's what that Special Needs Trust Fairness Act allowed them to do, set it up for themselves with monies that they might have there and yet still qualify for government benefits. And that's what you're trying to do with these specialized trusts, is preserve the government benefits, get the benefits payable, and then be able to use the trusts that are going to give you that extra amounts of money for purposes of your lifestyle.
Right. So it really, I mean, it does protect government benefits, but also keep in mind that it's not a checking account for the individual. It really has to be something to make their lives better. That's the one thing that I always tell families, because they're like, we're going to put everything into special needs and I'll take it out as I need it. It's not necessarily the case. When you take it out, it has to be for the benefit of that individual, has to make their life better. And the government does require reporting on that. So we always want our families to know that, of course, you can take money out for a new iPad, for the TV the person needs, or whatever the person needs to make their life better, the orthotics, the extra care provider, but it has to be for the benefit of the individual to make the quality of their life better. And you do have to report that. So you just want to keep that in mind.
So when we look at the next step, guardianship and conservatorship, Kelly's already dealt with that somewhat. Keep in mind that generally when you're thinking guardianship, that's primarily about the person, whereas conservatorship are more about the investments and or the assets of the individual and somebody to minister to that. You'll see guardianship involved. You'll see trust set up with trustees, and the trustees might be working with the financial issues as well, working in tandem with an institutional trustee. There's all kinds of different ways to set things up from a legal standpoint, and as we talked about, even alternatives, whether it be durable powers or whether a real need for conservatorship, which is the financial decisions to be made. Some of this can be all inclusive into a guardianship petition, where again, it can be limited on certain things. You could put in restrictions on certain things financially. It could put in protections so that an individual might not encumber themselves under a contract if they fully didn't understand what it was about. So guardianship, conservatorship, selecting trustees, those are all important pieces to what you might want to be dealing with when you're building a financial structure. Very reason, again, to be working with specialized attorneys that understand this and capturing as specifically as possible what the needs are going to be medically, whether the housing needs or residential needs, all the things that decisions that you would make, life decisions, can be captured very specifically in a guardianship petition for the individual, depending upon what you're looking to accomplish. And it doesn't mean we have to do guardianship. So much of these other things can be accomplished through durable powers or other letters that even in the letter of intent that gives people the rationale as to what the decisions need to be.
Right.
More to add there, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always think about when it comes to guardianship, and I'm not, a big fan of it either way. I believe that if someone can make their own decisions, I want to give them that independence and let them advocate for themselves. The problem that we have as special needs parents, and many of us run into it, is it's not that my son is going to do anything to harm him. It's typically others that harm the person that we're caring for or take advantage of them. And that's what I've seen on a pretty regular basis. My friends that their, children, adult children, are able to go to work and do things independently. Perfect example, her son sits next to someone on the bus that tells him, let me borrow your iPhone, I'm going to bring it back to you tomorrow. Doesn't bring the phone back. Or one of my friends that, the son was convinced to take out a credit card in his name, but didn't realize what he was actually doing. So it's protecting them in some ways from others that take advantage of them. So when you think about guardianship or conservatorship, durable powers of attorneys, really think about your situation. Though somebody may be very high functioning, able to do many, many things on their own, if they're bipolar and they're great when they're taking their medication, but when they don't take their medication, completely fall off, that's something that you need to take into consideration. Right now, if I didn't have guardianship of my son, who isn't able to make any medical decisions, the medical professionals do not have to provide me, without guardianship papers, any information regarding him. So those are some of the things we just want you to think about. It's not, we're for it or against it either way. It's really take these things into consideration, and then that should help you determine what's right for your family. Okay,
One
Jared,
last point is that the guardian, if you become a guardian over an individual, you do not assume liability. So I think a lot of people think that once they become guardianship, they've assumed the liability of something the person may do or a transaction or something like that. But the guardians do not assume liability in those situations. And that's another critical point. So Kelly, you want to deal with this, care provider?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the plan. Have you identified a care provider that's going to ensure the type of care that you would personally give to the person? Once again, back to the stories, we hear about individuals that are left to live with a sibling that they never got along with, and it's just a very bad fit. So if you're able to speak to the person that you're considering an alternate caregiver, ask them their opinion, ask them where they want to live, who they want to live with. And the person that you're identifying, are they on the same page with you? Do they have the same views that you have? Because that's what we run into problems with many of our families, that when they identify a care provider, they don't really tell them what that's going to mean. With my son, he's constant care. It's 24/7. I would want the person to fully understand what caring for him meant. And that's something that we ask all families to do. Have a very honest conversation. Sometimes it's difficult, but I would say that definitely have that conversation and try to identify someone that's more in line with the person you're caring for is looking for as well. Jared, do you have anything to add?
Nope, I think you covered it there. It's just important, again, for the communication piece. So why don't you just start on letter of intent?
So letter of intent is something that we spoke a little bit about before. It's not a legally binding document, but has been used in a court of law as the wishes of the family. What it really is, and I tell a lot of my families, it's like a letter to the babysitter on steroids. It's something that you would write down when you left the house when you had small children. Now, in the case of my son, because he is nonverbal, what exactly does it talk about? Well, it talks about his medical needs. It talks about the prescriptions that he's currently on. It talks about prescriptions that he was on that didn't work, that did work. It talks about types of treatments that we had him on. He was on the ketogenic diet for a while. It talks about that. How did it work? What was good about it? What wasn't good about it? And really, it talks about all of our hopes, our wishes, and our dreams. So that if I don't come back to New Jersey this week, if they ever let me out, what will happen is that if somebody had to pick up and kind of go through this letter, it would answer some of the questions that my son couldn't answer. Do we brush his teeth with warm water versus cold water? When he could eat chocolate, did he like chocolate? Is there something that soothes him? Is there a type of treatment that we've done with him that has been successful? Are there doctors that we work with that we would take him to because we know that those are the ones that he should be going to? Are there doctors that I wouldn't bring my dog to that I would never bring Nicholas to again? Absolutely. Is that in my letter of intent? For sure. Are the types of treatment that we provide him with, and many of them are physical, do we have a copy of how to do them? And do we have a little video for people to throw in and show them how to do this if he's having congestion and he's having respiratory issues? Absolutely. A document can be created. MassMutual, we do have a letter of intent document that we can certainly send you. If you reach out to Lori, we can get one out to all of you. You can put it in a notebook. You could put it on the computer. It has to be somewhere that it's with all your vital documents. And it really talks about everything that you want for that person or everything they want. You can talk about religion. You can talk about housing. Do you want them to live in a group home? Do you never want them to live in a group home? Are there family members you want them to be around? Are there family members you never want them to be around? It's everything about the person that they can't say for themselves or they couldn't tell someone. So for me, if you do nothing else, if these steps don't, make any sense to you today, or you don't have time to do these steps, I urge everybody to think about writing a letter of intent. You can just start by putting it in a notebook. My notebook's about this big. I've been doing it for many years. I update medications. I update treatments. I update people in his lives because people in our lives change. So you want to put that down as well. So everything about the person should be there so that if anything ever happened to you, it's with your vital documents. The person could pull it out and say, these are some of the things that she wanted for Nicholas, or these are some of the things that Nicholas wants. So if you do nothing else after this webinar, I would encourage all of you to consider writing a letter of intent. Doesn't take place of your will, doesn't take place of all your legal documents, but it certainly would be considered if something happened. Joe, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, and as we said, the importance of communication is critical, and a letter of intent could be shared with family, extended family. This is one of the best communication devices to capture everything that you see for the future and at the same time share it with everyone. So it's a very, very important piece. So when we start the process, again, I think we've said many times, you need to be dealing with people that really understand the issues, that are specialists in this area, dealing with in the legal side. We've talked about the 2 attorney groups as well as the elder law groups. The financial professionals, in MassMutual's case, we have professionals across the country. There's a designation called the Chartered Special Needs Consultant that was done by the American College, and you'll see people across the country with these different designations and credentials. So we just encourage that you work with professionals in this area that really understand what we're talking about. Anything to add here, Kelly?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Kelly, why don't you deal with how MassMutual?
Sure. I mean, how MassMutual can help you, as Jerry said, we have over 500 planners across the country that can certainly work with you to make a plan. We can also introduce you to nonprofit partners. We work with many groups like Ataxia that really provide our families with education and information. We can introduce you to special needs attorneys. We not only work with those 2 attorney groups, we work with many attorney groups across the country that specialize in this area. And we're never going to give you one name. We typically will give you 3 names so that you can decide the best one for you. We have a wide variety of special needs trust funding options that we can certainly discuss with you as well. Many families don't realize that many of our special needs trusts, our families that have special needs trusts, are not even really funded until death. So it's something that you can think about, but certainly MassMutual could sit down and help you with a plan. So really, in summary, it's about finding a quality professional to assist you. Remember that you're the expert about the dependent, and think lifetime care and quality of life. And that's what we really, want to help with our families, and certainly making the future for your dependent more secure really comes into play when you have a plan in place. So I don't know, Jar, is there anything that you'd like to add there?
Nope. We're at about 50 minutes, so we've got time. And Lori, I think it said we could even go over a little bit if we needed to. So I think we, at this point, open it up, Lori, to questions that might have existed or come in, and Kelly and I can help answer those.
Great. Thanks, guys. This has been very informative. I really appreciate the description of the team that you described. And once that team is formed and a plan is put in place, is there maybe a recommendation of times to regather the team to continue to assess the plan, or changes that may occur that you would advise somebody to bring that team back together again for reassessment?
Sure. I mean, one of the things is there's a lot of life events with our families. I think COVID was a life event for many families across the country because we were seeing how quickly people could be impacted by it. But typically, when someone is small, you put a plan in place, just similar to like you do an IEP. You sit down, you do a planning process, but as they change and their needs change, the planning also changes. So what we typically say is that, when someone's at the age of 18, you start thinking about adulthood. Where are they going to live? Who are they going to live with? I would say, that you should review it at least on an annual basis. And if you have medical needs or behaviors or things that are changing, or the family has changed, many of our families, maybe there are 2 parents involved, but now there's 1, or something has changed in the family, that's the time that you should bring the team in. The people that you initially picked, that doesn't always mean those are going to be the people at the end. I've seen plans change along the way that they were close with certain family members. They were the ones that were going to take over. But then the sibling got married and the spouse didn't really want that plan. The spouse didn't want that sibling living with them. So I would say that you would do it on at least an annual basis, kind of check in with everybody, make sure they still want to play those roles, or maybe there's new people. Now you have a professional in there, you have a social worker in there. Something in the person's life has changed and you should incorporate it into the team. Jer?
Yeah, and I would say that, particularly like the letter of intent, to the extent that some things change, you want to make sure that you're updating the letter of intent so that's really current. Maybe it doesn't mean bringing everybody together, or maybe it just means sharing updates as they happen. So it doesn't always have to be a really huge meeting or a big meeting, but it's currency that's important as things change, particularly life events that take place and things like that. So we've made those points. So that's good. Lori, any other questions?
That's great advice. And I love that you guys provide referrals or work with different attorneys that specialize in this area. If folks are going out on their own to research attorneys to help them out or to consider them as part of their team, what should they consider about that representative, and what questions should they ask in evaluating that person?
Sure. I mean, we get a lot of families that go to their family attorney. Even my own husband is an attorney. He's not able, and he wasn't able, to draft my son's special needs trust. It is very specific. So it is a specific specialty. So one of the things that I encourage our families, well, first of all, our advisors should be giving them at least 3 names. Typically, they're from these organizations, but also nonprofits will tell us about individuals that have worked well with their families that specialize in this area. Like many of my advisors, I have 86% of my advisors that are also caregivers or special needs parents or involved. Many of the attorneys that are involved in this specialty are also special needs parents, siblings, and caregivers. One of the things that I would ask is, how many trusts do you draft, special needs trusts do you draft a year? If somebody tells me 2 or 3, I'm running out the door. If it's something that they do on a regular basis, that makes me feel more comfortable. And I ask them straight out, how many special needs trusts do you do? How many special needs families do you work with versus elder law families? So, I mean, you really want to understand what the specialty is. I also check, are they involved with nonprofits? You know, what nonprofits have they worked with? Do they advocate for the nonprofits as well? But Jar, what other questions would you
Well,
ask?
and it was on the slide, but again, you can go to the web and look up these two organizations, the Academy of Special Needs Planners, as well as the Special Needs Alliance. And then on those sites, you can actually click areas where you live, and it'll point out those special needs attorneys that happen to be in your area. Clearly, too, if you're Googling special needs attorneys in your area, you can also see from their bios whether they're involved in any of these organizations. And as Kelly's saying, what you want to do is make sure you're verifying, in fact, that these people are active and involved in this kind of work, because you want that kind of expertise. And I think it's true also in the accountancy area, with CPAs. We have a much more difficult time sometimes identifying accountants to work with. And we also find many families are missing out on a lot of deductibility of different things that are taking place because they haven't gotten the appropriate advice. And again, it's a specialty area. We find that our areas, particularly that many of the CPAs that are involved in this, as Kelly has said, also have children or also have been dealing with the caregiving issues. So, you know, I think it's important to really seek out the expertise, and we can help in that. If you make the inquiry, we can help identify people in the local area, both in the legal field, accountancy field, and those that can help back up in the nonprofit sector. And it's important to utilize those resources.
Well, thanks so much for that insight. We do have an attendee here with a question about access to their elder care attorney because of COVID. There's been barriers with access to the, I'm sure professionals like yourself and special needs planning and legal representation. This person's in New Jersey and is wondering when perhaps that type of representation will be accessible to them. And even more so, are these professionals offering any type of like tele appointments with their clients?
Sure. I mean, hello, my Jersey person. I'm here as well, and we're still pretty much on phase 1, if that. So they have been doing, and it's really across the country, because obviously many of us that care for someone with special needs, it's not the time for us to be out, even though things are opening up. We're still, a lot of us are very high risk. So many of our advisors have been doing video conferences, Zoom conferences, go to meeting conferences with their families. So this doesn't cost anything. If there's someone that's interested, you can certainly send me their name and where they live, and we can have them speak to an advisor, or I can share an advisor's information with them. There is no fee to do anything like that, but certainly it's been going on. We've actually had more families reaching out to us during this epidemic than we've ever seen, because now the need to get those vital documents in place and the planning in place is suddenly hitting home. So certainly it's going on right now. And if somebody needs some help, you can share their information with us, or I can share an advisor's information with them.
Well, and I think too, Kelly, I'm getting notifications on a daily basis from the attorneys we work with that are all doing virtual appointments. And so I think that's an option if the capacity is there to have a Zoom appointment, or all the various different platforms that are out there, from Microsoft Teams to others. Most of the attorneys are doing that kind of work. I know all of our associates have the ability to do Zoom. So I think it's, if nothing else, you begin with an email or you begin with a phone call, and then see what capacity exists for having these kinds of specialized meetings. But we all have a new way of doing business these days, and it was brought upon us because of the COVID-19. At the same time, there's an aspect that it's made us more effective and the ability to stay in contact on a more regular and easy basis. And so just to encourage everybody, if you have a need, don't hesitate to reach out, and then and there's ways to facilitate these kinds of meetings.
Absolutely.
That's great, because a number of us will be maybe self-isolating for a longer duration, even after things start opening up. So that's good to know. An attendee would like to know what is TOD and POD?
Okay, well, the first one, TOD, is transfer of
That's
debt
right.
on debt. And what you have, a certain property, and what you see that most commonly used is brokerage accounts, stock accounts, things like that, where, like a beneficiary arrangement on life insurance, you basically put in a form that says, if something were to happen to me, here's who inherits this account. That, by putting a TOD, bypasses probate. It goes directly to the individuals involved. I think if there's going to be minor children or things like that, there has to be some integration of the planning from a legal structure, because minors can't receive funds. Excuse me, but it's something that needs to be looked at, because it does circumvent the normal processes of probate and allows for things to pass very, very quickly. There's been some changes most frequently with the Secure Act, most recently with the Secure Act when it comes to retirement plans. And those with disabilities involving retirement plans, there's still a lot of flexibility as far as leaving beneficiary arrangements there. And then POD is very similar. It's a transference piece of paper, basically, that you just say who you want the money's transferred to if something that happens. That's generally used in savings and checking, those kinds of things. So they're just different forms of transference that all avoid probate. We didn't really have the time to mention it, but ABLE accounts are now something that's available to anybody that had a disability manifest prior to age 26. This allows us to accumulate some funds. Almost all the ABLE accounts come with a debit card for easy administration. It is also a Medicaid payback, but if funds are coming in, it's a good way to set up a very simple process of utilizing funds for all disability related expenses. So depending upon, like a savings account, a TOD could be set up to go somewhere, but you could also have monies flowing into a ABLE account. So again, integrating all these financial instruments, and a good financial planner, or those that are specialized in this area, are going to know how to integrate all of these kinds of things, but they're basically transference processes.
I mean, ABLE is great for a lot of different things. We didn't have time today, but certainly ABLE is another option. I don't know if it replaces a special needs trust. I'd say no, but it does allow you to put money away. The good thing about ABLE is that a special needs trust, you cannot take money out for food and shelter, but you can transfer money from a special needs trust to an ABLE account to pay for food and shelter. So, I mean, I think utilizing the two in some cases is ideal. It's not a place to save money, because as Jerry had indicated, ABLE does have a payback provision, same as a special needs trust with Medicaid. They can come back and say, we paid money, we want to take that money back. It doesn't matter where the money came from, because ABLE has that payback across the board. So that's not where I would save money, but I think using an ABLE with a special needs trust can be ideal, and you can use it in some of these situations.
I mean, there's a lot of specifics around ABLE, but I would just encourage everybody in their states, or there's the National ABLE Alliance, to go in and compare. I mean, the monies that are in there are accumulating on a tax-free basis, and they're not taxable when they come out. So it's just another instrument, financial instrument, that could be a part of the planning. It's relatively new. It was signed into law in 2014. It didn't really become active much until 2015 and 16. But again, it's another device. It's another thing to consider that gives us flexibility for the various things that are going on, particularly in the public assistance arena, where you can't accumulate any more than $2,000. It allows you to accumulate there a little bit, use it as a spend account, but never run afoul of the asset test.
But
So
also, you know, gives people a little independence, which is what it was really created for. It was modeled off of 529, so that people with disabilities, adult people, didn't have to go to their parents, you know, to get money to go take a taxi to work. So it really gave them independence, and it can be utilized that way, and it does work nicely. And you don't have to have one in the state in which you reside. You really need to go on the ABLE website and take a look at it, and it's pretty easy to set up. So it's something that we encourage all families to take a look at, or when you're talking to your advisor, talk to them about ABLE as well. At MassMutual, they can help you with ABLE as well.
Well, that's great to really know about that option. I know that we're over time, but we are going to proceed with addressing a few more questions that have been submitted. This attendee's son graduated college, and it was diagnosed 2 years after graduating college. And he is on SS disability. And this attendee would like to know if the college loans are forgivable, or where they can get information about that.
Well, again, most of the better financial planners are going to have some understanding around that. Unfortunately, that's probably not specific enough information individually to give a concrete answer. Depending upon the loan program that they are in, the status of the loan program, whether it's in a payback or if it's still in a process of where they're not having to pay on it or interest only, and the definitions of the various different loan programs as regards disability. But yes, there are in many of the loan programs forgiveness when it comes to a disability or permanent disability situation. So it's something that really needs to be looked into and researched. If nothing else, it could be a delay or create a period of time where nothing has to be paid on it. But there's different layers of possibility there depending upon the extent of the disability and diagnosis of when and all those kinds of things that will come into play. But it's definitely worth getting into on the specifics of that particular situation.
Yeah, that's when you really need the diagnosis and all that information. That's when it comes into play. So want to make sure that you have everything documented, but we would definitely need, more information, because you can't just give a, this is the answer to that.
Particular program they're in, because there are different programs.
There is forgiveness.
Very important. And there are also a lot of companies out there now, Mass included, that have programs for the consolidation of these loans. So if they have multiple loans at different interest rates, that's another consideration. College loans these days, a huge percentage of those coming out are coming out with college loans, and they might have multiple loans. And some might be underwritten or backed up by the parent or not. So all of those are factors, and we have programs that call for consolidation and everything else. And we deal all the time with our families because of cash flow issues. We want to make sure that we're doing the optimal situation. So when a disability comes into play here, it's going to depend upon the program that they're in, as well as Kelly said, the diagnosis and disability and whether it's considered to be permanent or not, those kinds of things.
Great. There are some requests or questions about how to obtain a letter of intent. Kelly mentioned earlier, you can email me. My email address is Lori, spelled Lori, at ataxia.org, and we'd be happy to send that over to you. And is there any direct contact information that you'd like to provide?
You see on the final slide on the screen right now is the massmutual.com/special needs. So it's www.massmutual.com/special needs, and you can make a request there.
And I can also, in my email is Piacenti, Piacenti @massmutual.com. You can send it to me as well, but certainly that's our central mailbox. And if you have a question, if it comes in and you could just put a taxi in it, we'll make sure that we get back to you. And Lori, I'll get you the letter of intent so that you can share that with them.
Wonderful, thank you. This attendee's question is, what does one do if there is no one who will assume responsibility for the adult child with disabilities? Are there resources other than APD for consultation?
There are nonprofits that do this across the country. So I know that there are quite a few nonprofits. Jerry's in Virginia. I know of quite a few there, but I know of in California. It depends on where they are. but I do believe that there are nonprofits that will step in and help as well. Jerry, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and you have organizations. It really depends upon the need, whether we're talking about guardianship of the person. A lot of the nonprofits
Property
do
or
have
trust.
programs where they can do that. If we're talking about trustees over the financial issues, there are corporate trustees, attorneys, banks like Wells Fargo as an example, or even MassMutual will administer special needs trust. It really depends more specifically on the need. But if there's a need that exists, you can bet that there's things out there to solve that need because it's market driven from that standpoint. So we always like to have some level of family involvement, but the expertise might not be there. But the family involvement brings a personality that an institutional trustee or corporate trustee might not do. But we see also a lot of documents to get the professional expertise. There'll be co-trustee situations of a family member bringing some of that personality to it, as well as the corporate trustee that has the fiduciary responsibility to do things correctly. So that all comes into the overall plan, bringing that structure together based on the actual situation.
Right. It depends on the need. There's usually, something for every need that our families have.
Great. Do you have any suggestions for Canadian special needs attorneys?
We do not, because the rules regarding what we speak about is for the US. Unfortunately, the rules regarding, government benefits and different things for Canada is different. So I don't have any, but I could certainly find one. I could reach out to some of our attorney groups and get one if somebody needs one. Jar, do you have any? But the
Well,
rules are
no,
different. I
from
just
a,
want to make that very
from a,
clear.
yeah, from a licensure standpoint and registration standpoint, we're actually as advisors precluded from doing anything internationally. So although we might help assist in kind of linking resource, there's really not anything particularly we can do just because of the nature of the way things have to be registered domestically within the United States.
And also the benefits, the government benefits are very different.
Oh, very different, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why, I mean, if we have enough trouble keeping up with all the possibilities in the United States, when you look at all the various different things there. So to take on the possibility of trying to understand internationally everything that might exist in Europe or Canada or Mexico or wherever, it's almost impossible. And so by nature, our regulators preclude us from any sort of international type work.
A number of our attendees or community members may have maybe disabled to qualify for government benefits, but they don't have a specific diagnosis. They have ataxia, but not a specific diagnosis of the type of ataxia. Or they may have a very rare form of ataxia. Do you have any advice on how people that are undiagnosed but are disabled can describe or articulate or advise their physicians to articulate their situation in order to access government benefits and other resources without a specific diagnosis?
Right. Well, they need something from a physician. So, I mean, if the physician that they're treating with will write that, typically the government will accept that. As in the case of my son, they wanted documentation from the physicians he was treating with. As long as the physicians are going to say that, there shouldn't be an issue. They could say they have a rare form of ataxia. I don't think they're looking for the exact diagnosis, but they are looking for the treatment. They are looking for someone to indicate what they are or are not able to do, their ability, so that they can say, well, this person is totally disabled. But they are looking for documentation from a physician. If somebody is in school, I always say to them, bring the IEP, bring the documentation you've had along the way. If someone is older, then clearly they need documentation from the physicians that they've treated with. So those are the things that I would suggest.
Yeah, and I've had many situations where the diagnosis wasn't clear or wasn't complete. And in those, I really encourage the consult, at least, and many of the attorneys will do it for at no fee, but a consult with again, there are attorneys that specialize in the disability-related SSDI as well as SSI applications, and they know the kinds of things that the system is looking for when it comes to defining that. As Kelly said, anything that you have that indicates accommodations like an IEP or things that are developmental in nature or accommodations that might be taking place by an employer that's documented in an employee's file. But I would encourage on those kinds of situations, a consult with an attorney is very well worth it because they're going to be able to help structure what's going to take place. And we've had much greater success going into Social Security to begin with when we've had the consult from the attorney that does the appeals or does the reconsiderations and knows how to document that file getting ready to go in.
Well, that's great advice and an excellent segue, Jerry, into our final question, which I think is an important one. What should folks expect to pay for services for an attorney to explore guardianship or special needs trust and other things needed in the plan?
Well, I mean, I can tell you, Jerry will give you the cost, but I have, because my advisors are across the country, and I've heard anywhere from $1,500 to $10,000. There is no cookie cutter approach to it. It really depends upon what you need. I've heard that everything combined, and Jerry, you can certainly tell me if this is different. Keep in mind, we're on the East Coast. I've heard from the West Coast. I've heard from West Virginia. It really depends upon your area. It depends on the expertise of the individual. But I would say all bundled, I'm hearing the average could be close to $3,500. What do you say to that, Jerry?
Well, and again, it depends. There are a lot of the planners that are working on a fee-for-service basis and doing financial plans. There are planners that work on compensation from any product that ultimately may be purchased and don't necessarily do a fee or in addition to it. It depends upon the planner. The attorney fees can range, as Kelly said, hugely different depending upon the area and even within a given locale. I've got relationships in my locale with a lot of attorneys, and the fees vary hugely between them. And yet, I would say the expertise doesn't vary as much as the fee. I just encourage families to not hesitate to say up front, I need to understand your fee structure. I need to understand if I can pay this over time. I need to understand if there's any sort of help that you can give as far as doing it at less cost or anything like that. Most of the financial planners are going to have relationships that where they've had these discussions with the attorneys. So it's not, sometimes it's about where they're located geographically. Same with the accountants. Sometimes, I mean, I've got an accountant in our area that will review a tax return, not during tax season clearly, but will review a tax return, and he doesn't charge for it at all. So I think making contact and not hesitating, don't hesitate to ask the question. Don't feel bad about asking the question. I need to get an idea of what this is going to cost. And I need to, and what the process is going to be and the involvement that's going to take place during that process. Clearer you are about that, clearer you are about your openness to saying, because we don't want people to not plan. And so it's important really to explore that to make sure that you're getting the answers that you need to make a decision to move forward.
And keep in mind that not everything, you don't have to go to an attorney to do everything. I mean, I have some families that file for their own guardianship. They pay the court fees and they do it themselves. It's a pretty simple process, but it takes a long time. And do you have time to do that? Do you have time to go to the court, to petition the court? Some families don't, so it's up to you. But if you go online, you can see how much that costs. The other thing that I would say is, you can go and you can apply for government benefits on your own. Many of our advisors that don't charge a fee, we have about half. Half are financial planners that charge a fee, half are not. But many of them will go to Social Security with you or assist you with Social Security. But if not, that doesn't cost anything to go and do that on your own. As far as the attorney fees, I'm right there with Jerry. It really depends. But that's why I always suggest that our advisors give 3 attorneys. And usually it's 3 different people, but it's also 3 different costs. And so what I always say is, tell me exactly what I'm getting for that cost. Why am I going to pay you $6,000 when I could pay this guy $3,000 and get the same thing? So we want our families to be aware of that as well. And we try to work with attorneys that have different cost levels or are willing to give some of our families a break, because we know it's something we have to do, but not everybody necessarily has the money for it. The other thing that many of our families can do, it's not advisable, but you can leave information in your will. I mean, you can die intestate and put, upon my death, set up a special, before you disperse any of my assets, set up a trust for my son, Nicholas Piacenti, a special needs trust. That's yet another way to do it. Not the ideal way, because if anybody left them money in the interim, you could potentially lose government benefits, but yet that is a way in which it could cover them if anything was to happen to them and there was no one else to protect the individual.
And it really speaks ultimately that this is a very individual thing. So, I mean, I think it's finding the resources and then applying it to your specific situation, because they all have their own uniquenesses that we have to deal with.
Yeah, there's no cookie cutter approach to it. I mean, every situation is different. Every family need is different. It's really what's good for your family and what you can do. What I would say is that you need some type of plan in place, and whether it's just the letter of intent or just having people that, you know what, if something happens to me, go to this daughter and she's going to tell you what to do. You need a plan in place. There's way too many of our families that don't have anything because we're so busy with the day-to-day care, but they need to do something.
Well, that's great. Thank you both, Jerry and Kelly, for everything that you've shared on this important topic today. We know how to go ahead and get started, important considerations, and certainly some real valuable questions that will help us as we move forward in this process. So thank you.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you, Jerry, for helping today. And any questions, once again, the www.massmutual.com /special needs. They can send questions there. They can send them through you, or certainly send them directly to me. We're happy to get back to them and help in any way we can. It's always a pleasure to help you guys and to speak on any of your webinars.
Very much.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, attendees, for joining. As a reminder, a copy of our recording of today's webinar will become available, so you can go back and refresh yourself on any of the areas that were discussed today. And we truly appreciate you all attending. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Bye.
Bye.